Whenever a person hears the word slavery, their mind often rewinds to a United States in the 1800s where African Americans were dehumanized and treated as property. The sickening reality is that human trafficking and slavery prevails to this day, and no country escapes from this atrocious problem. According to Free the Slaves, there are around 40 million vulnerable men, women, and children around the world living with fear in unpleasant conditions where their tyrannical owners are gaining a profit from them. Serbia is no exception regarding this issue because around 30,000 of its 7 million inhabitants are considered slaves. In fact, every 32 out of 100 Serbian citizens are vulnerable to becoming a victim of human trafficking. Serbia is a Balkan country in Southeast Europe that made up Yugoslavia during the 20th century before it divided. The exploitation of labor is abundant in this country, and it takes place mostly in the garment, construction, and prostitution industries. Men are often exploited in the construction industry, women in the garment and prostitution industries, and children are forced to beg for money in the streets. According to the Council of Europe, the exploitation of labor is increasing. It is difficult to identify victims because many are afraid to tell their stories and lose their jobs due to Serbia's unemployment rate of 16%. Over 100,000 formally and non-formally employed workers, mostly women in the garment and textile industries, are treated like machines or slaves, not human beings. They are yelled at, and sexual harassment is part of their everyday life, as mentioned by the Clean Clothes campaign. Women are paid less than the minimum salary and receive no medical attention when they faint from inhaling the machine's fumes. The garment industry is important to Serbia's economy because there are 1,800 garment factories that hold about 8% of the country's workforce. The Serbian government supports this industry and cannot boycott the factories because many workers will lose their jobs. Another industry where modern slavery is common is in the sex trade. Many women throughout Serbia are tricked and taken to other Balkan countries to become part of the sex trade. Women from countries like Bosnia and Macedonia are tricked into the sex trade, arrive to Serbia, and are sexually exploited. Even though prostitution is illegal, there are around 40,000 prostitutes in Serbia, and many are victims of modern slavery. A victim that suffered from sexual exploitation for commercial purposes is Mirigli. Mirigli was a Roma girl that lived in a slum under a bridge in Belgrade with her family. Instead of going to school, she grew up begging for money in the streets. When she was 11 years old, the cardboard house that her family had spent hours building was destroyed because they were not allowed to live in that area. Her entire family moved to a nearby village, but Mirigli's father sold her to the supervisor of the demolition. The man promised a quality job for Mirigli as a domestic worker. She would receive food, new shoes, and an education. Once Mirigli realized the vile lie, it was too late to go back. According to the Global Hope Network, she lived a life after midnight hours, her throat always plugged with fear, restricted breath, not daring to yield to the compulsion for a deep breath that might cause a cry. 10 years later, Mirigli managed to escape and find her family. According to the U.S. Department of State's 2017 TIP report, Serbia is ranked Tier 2 watch list. The tiers are categories used to describe the expansion of modern slavery per country. Being in the Tier 2 watch list means that the government recognizes the issue, but the efforts to decrease modern slavery were not very effective. Serbia does not meet the Trafficking Victims Protections Act standards to say that slavery is not a problem, because the number of victims is increasing. Serbia has shown efforts to decrease human trafficking because a law enforcement that banned trafficking was passed, stating that the punishment could be up to 15 years in prison. Although this law helps, the government does not provide enough protection for victims. When a person is rescued from slavery, their trauma does not end because without protection, these victims are vulnerable to being trafficked again or to unfair treatments of others. Another factor that aids to slavery in Serbia is the amount of refugees entering the country. Many Roma children are homeless because they flee their countries looking for better opportunities in Europe. In Serbia's capital, Belgrade, many Roma children perform tasks in the streets or beg for money. Most are unaccompanied, which increases their chances of being forced into slavery or prostitution. The government should work on providing special shelters for them, along with easy access to compensation. The government should also cooperate with NGOs to provide basic services to victims, such as a proper place to stay. Some NGOs that are currently working on stopping the exploitation of human beings in Serbia are ASTRA, the Center for Trafficking Victims Protection, or CPTV, and Athena, CPTV has a protection and reception agency. The reception agency works on providing shelters and basic needs to victims, but they have not been very successful because they lacked resources and government support. Although it was not very successful, the fight to stop slavery in Serbia continues because Astra is raising funds to provide victims with shelters. Every single one of us can play a very important role in exterminating this problem in Serbia and worldwide. Raising awareness is very important to communicate to other people about the inhuman behavior and mistreatment that many people are facing. You can raise awareness via your social media to impact a vast audience and bring this problem to the surface. You can also donate to these NGOs to improve the protection of Serbian victims by entering their websites and donating. Every action counts, and your actions can have a larger impact than you imagine.